Good evening, everyone. It's usually good morning when I say this, but it is now evening time here. Bedtime. The kids are just about to go off to bed. And I've been out in the garden, doing a bit of work and doing a bit in the garden today. And just completely ran out of time. But it's quite nice recording in the evening, just relaxing, chilling a little bit. I did remember, you probably saw on my post yesterday that went along with my video, that I did remember that the thing that I meant to tell you is that for those of you that were looking through the playlist, and it was like lockdown and lockdown, lockdown and lockdown, lockdown and lockdown, Sims, Island Paradise, I can't remember what it's called, Island Living, and there was loads of Island Living videos on my playlist, and I was like, what? There was Avalon, our oldest, is obsessed with Sims, like Lucy, my oldest, was for a long time, and she keeps adding Sims video. I don't even know how she does it. So apologise if you do see some slightly weird videos in the playlist. They are probably not mine. Although, they might well be mine. I quite enjoy a game of Sims too. Anyway, as it's late, we'd better crack on. Alex is inside Furnace Penitentiary, inside the infirmary, and he is basically being experimented on by the Warden. And the Warden is not kind, nor are the Weezers or the Black Suits or anything like that. So, things are going pretty badly for Alex right now. But he is, and the Warden's process of turning someone is partly physical. It's partly turning their body into this great big muscular mass with silver eyes, but it's also mental as well. The Warden has been showing Alex some pretty horrific images and basically trying to get Alex to see himself as something new, a force of a victor, a predator, and in doing so forgetting everything about his old life. So this is the battle that Alex now faces. Can he hold on to enough of himself to not become another of the Warden's sick toys? Truth. More darkness, more dreams. An animal pound, row upon row of cages drenched in shadow. I moved among them, peering through the rusted bars to see the creatures inside cowering in the corners, shivering in clouds of their own breath. None of them turned to face me, but there was no mistaking them for the boys they were. Each was dressed in the same cloth uniform as before, marked with a 36 above the twisted cross of the swastika. A noise rose up from the other side of the room, and a metal door swung open. Before I could find a place to hide, two men marched in, decked in heavy leather jackets and gas masks, and carrying a bundle of rags between them. They looked right at me, but there was no trace of emotion in their eyes as they dumped the heavy rags onto a motionless pile on the floor. The guards strolled along the row of cages, breathing loudly through the contraptions strapped to their faces. As they got nearer, I was surprised to see that they were younger than I'd assumed, maybe in their 20s, but there was something in the lines around their foreheads and the dull weight of their eyes that made me think their youth was a lie. I felt something grab my leg, and I staggered back, staring into the cage beside me. Bony fingers led to a skeletal arm that in turn was connected by shadow to two white, round eyes. The boy glanced at the guards, who still marched this way, then fixed me in his terrified gaze. "You have to let us out of here," he said. "There isn't much time." The kid in the cage sniffed, wiping an emaciated hand under his nose. He leaned forwards into the light, and this time I recognised my own face instantly. The shock of witnessing myself so weak, making the bile rise in my throat. I hadn't seen my reflection since I'd arrived in Furnace, but after everything I'd been through here, I knew I looked more like this wraith than the healthy kid I remembered staring back at me from the mirror at home. And I hated myself for it. I looked at the guards, almost upon us. They walked with strength and with purpose, their eyes fixed in determination. There was no weakness there, only force, and more than anything, I wanted to feel it. "Please, Alex," my ghost said, "don't forget who you are." "I'm not Alex, I replied, and in my dream my voice thundered around the room like a bomb had been detonated. The guards reached the cage and unbolted it, the kids inside scrabbling back against the bars. I'm not Alex. He never existed. You never existed. You do exist, the kid screamed as the men dragged him from the cage, the wiry muscles in his arms powerless to root him in place. You do, Alex. It is not too late. Then he was out, just another bundle of rags held between the two guards as they strode from the room. I rose from the dream to feel something cool against my face, a wet cloth that was pulled away as soon as I jerked into consciousness. My new eyes snapped into focus without hesitation, revealing the warden perched on the perched on the side of my bed. He laid the cloth gently across the heart monitor beside him, then lifted a glass of water and held it to my lips. I drank greedily, relishing the fluid as it quenched the desert of my mouth. Easy now, he said quietly, pulling the glass away. It's been a while since you've ingested anything. The body can't process water for the first few days after the nectar has been introduced, and it cannot process food, period. I slurred a few words that turned into growls as they hit the back of my throat. The warden's face peeled open when he heard them, yellow teeth like tombstones behind the cadaverous smile. You're making excellent progress, he said, resting the glass on his knee and looking at me like a teacher might look at his favourite pupil. You were dreaming again. Tell me what you saw. I snatched out at the tornado of thoughts that spiralled around my waking mind, catching hold of a question. Why does it matter? They're only dreams. The warden laughed, offering me another sip of water, which I swallowed too fast. I coughed half of it back out onto his outstretched arm, but instead of reprimanding me, he reached around and patted my back until the spasms had subsided. I told you to take it easy, he said. Your body is changing. You can't do things the way you used to. Somewhere deep inside me, the warden's words set off an alarm bell, but the poison in my veins quickly smothered it. He rested the glass on the floor and brushed the liquid from his sleeve. Then he returned his attention to me. I could feel his eyes boring into my head the way I always had, but this time, instead of the nausea it usually produced, the sensation made me feel safe, protected. They're not just dreams, he went on. There's something more, half memories, half nightmares from a long time ago. Whose memories? I managed, the warden's words getting caught up in the confusion in my head, their meaning torn apart before I could grasp it. People like you, he explained. People who sacrificed a life of weakness to become something much greater. The first of their kind, the creators of us all. You must have already felt their touch up in the cells. Everybody has bad dreams in furnace, but sometimes the nectar is so strong it seeps into the very air. I remembered the nightmares that had plagued me in general population, images of a prison with glass walls, and my reflection that of a wheezer. But they are mere glimpses, the warden went on. Fragments. Only when the nectar is in your blood do you see the whole picture. Tell me what you were dreaming just now. The trench? I shook my head, fighting to remember. A room, I whispered. Cages and guards. Interesting, the warden said, nodding gravely. The transformation is occurring more quickly than I thought. Do you remember who was in the cage? I thought back, probing the fog that had been the dream. There had been a boy in the cage, skinny to the point of starvation, too weak to stop himself being taken. I couldn't picture his face, only the whites of his eyes. A boy, I said eventually. A weak boy, nobody. This time the warden's smile made him look like he'd been sliced open from ear to ear. Good, he hissed. Very good. You're ready for the next stage of your treatment. He He started to get up, but I muttered a few more words and he lowered himself back onto the bed. For an instant his face fell, and I saw past the facade, saw the monster lurking beneath the leathery skin. But then the black cloud of my mind shifted again, and I found myself staring into his smile. "What?" he asked. "The nectar," I said, stumbling over my words. "What is it?" "It isn't important what it is," he replied without hesitation. "Only what it does. It frees you, frees your primal self. It shows you the truth. I think you're beginning to understand what that truth is. Maybe you always knew." I thought about the film, about the never-ending parade of sadism and violence and force, and the nectar inside me seemed to pulse with dark energy. I felt a tight pain in my cheeks, and it took me a moment to realise that I was grinning. "Yes, you know," the warden said, as if sensing my excitement. "The nectar feeds on those emotions, and in doing so unleashes them. The more you hate the world, the more bitterness you feel at the way life has treated you, the more power the nectar will give you. The weaker you are, the stronger you will become." He stood, walking to the curtain that sealed off my cubicle from the rest of the infirmary. "Don't question it, just accept it. The nectar will show you what really lies at your core." He had almost gone by the time I put together my next question. "But who are you?" I said to his back. He paused, then turned to face me, the white curtain a shroud around him. In that moment I met his eyes, raw pits that radiated power and seemed to have no end. "Who am I?" he repeated, chewing on the question. "I am the man who made you. I am your father." Then the white fabric flapped and he was gone, leaving me alone with my smile. There's a lot of growling in that chapter. Flesh. Lovely chapter title, that one. They came for me while I was sleeping. I opened my eyes to see the illuminated ceiling flow past above me like a river of molten rock, the gurney rattling against the stone floor. There was a flap of plastic as I was wheeled through the slats that marked the exit from the infirmary towards the operating theatres, the rooms where the where the wheezers worked their sick magic. I felt no fear, even though I knew where I was going and why. I heard the staccato song of an electric lock, followed by the hiss of the sliding door. A chorus of wheezers fluttered from the room ahead as the surgeons inside greeted my arrival. I didn't have to look up to picture their faces, the rusted gas masks sewn into their decaying flesh, the gleam in those black piggy eyes. I felt my skin crawl at the thought of them, but I ignored the sensation. After all, it wouldn't be my skin for much longer. I'd soon be a new man, far stronger, iron muscles wrapped in a jacket of steel. My head lolled to one side as the black suits hoisted me onto the operating table, and I saw the warden stride into the room. He beamed at me, an expression I was getting used to, and walked over. "Good, good," he muttered. "No fights, no protests. You know this is the right thing." He glanced up, and I followed his line of sight to see 3 wheezers preparing equipment. The light reflected from the scalpels and bone saws dancing across the red walls. The tools all looked familiar, but I couldn't think from where. For a fleeting moment, I saw myself climbing, hammers and pins in the rock, but the image couldn't anchor itself and it soon fell away. "Run a test," the warden said to one of the wheezers, "then start on his legs." He looked at me once more and smiled, but the way his mouth twisted upward made me think of hunger rather than affection. Then the view was blocked by a black suit, the hulking figure strapping my torso to the table and fixing my head into a brace. The guard checked over his shoulder, and from the click of shoes I knew he was watching the warden leave. He looked back at the last buckle, giving it a tug to make sure it was secure, then bent down and put his mouth to my ear. "I'm not going to lie to you," he said, his voice a sonic pulse that echoed around my brain. "The procedure hurts like hell. You'll feel like your body's being pulled apart piece by piece, then sewn together again with hot needles. I guess that's not too far from the truth, but stick in there, ride out the pain, because when you're done, you'll be one of us." Something swelled in my chest, a feeling I hadn't experienced for a long time. I don't know if there was a name for it, but I knew what it meant. I belonged. The black suit patted me gently on the shoulder, then cast a suspicious look at the Weezers as they moved in. "Ride it out," he said without looking back, then walked out of the door. I turned to watch the surgeons approach, a wall of filthy leather and ancient syringes. One slid a needle into my arm, and the welcome numbness of the nectar swept through me. The other two lifted glinting weapons in their tattered gloves, the pitch of their Weezers even higher than usual. But I wasn't scared. I welcomed them because they were here to give me what I wanted. Very soon now, I'd join the ranks of the powerful, the black suits, my brothers. He hadn't been lying. It hurt like hell. I must have blacked out with the first incision, the sensation like somebody holding a blowtorch to my skin. But even under a shield of sleep, I could feel them working on me, as though the nectar wanted me to sense the pain in my muscles, in my bones, to feel the transformation taking place. The agony filled my head with images that must have been memories, but which I couldn't place. I pictured a boy being beaten to a pulp in an old gymnasium, other kids with skulls on their bandanas letting loose with kicks and punches. I saw the same boy caught in the jaws of a foaming river, only luck keeping him from being torn to pieces on the knuckled walls. I saw him falling into the flames of an incinerator, pulled from the fire before it could take hold. And that same boy, whose face I knew so well, yet at the same time didn't, followed me into my dreams, where he pleaded with me to remember who I was. But even as the guards carried him off into the black recesses of my nightmare, the kid couldn't tell me my name. He, too, had forgotten it. The pain was so intense that it consumed every other emotion, except for the anger. I lay on the table, alone in the small room, while the fury inside me grew. It was as if the searing heat in my legs was a fire, one that literally made my blood boil. I didn't know what fueled the hatred inside me. It wasn't directed at the Weezers or the Warden, certainly not the black suits. It was everything else, all the pathetic people of the world who led their lives as meekly and quietly as possible, who had no idea of the forces at work beneath their feet. All those who relied on others to fight for them, who didn't have the strength to survive by themselves. The thought of them, the idea that I used to be one of them, made me sick with revulsion. I shifted my body as best I could beneath the leather straps, the movement causing a fresh explosion of pain in my legs. I couldn't lift my head high enough to see what the surgeons had done to them, but I knew anyway. They would resemble immense slabs of muscle, barely contained by the skin stitched around them. As soon as they healed, I'd be able to outrun anyone, catch any prey, and I would show no mercy to those who could not defend themselves. I wanted to see past the anger, to remember how I'd gotten here. Surely I hadn't always been like this, so full of rage. But there was nothing in my head other than furnace. I must have been born here in this place. Yes, this was my home, and the warden my father. And yet still something tugged at the back of my mind, a nagging thought that came and went too fast to make any sense of. Like a blue bottle smashing its haphazard path from window to window. There was something else, something I had forgotten, something important. But how important could it be? I had the nectar swimming in my veins, giving me strength I never knew I could possess. I would soon have the body to match my mind, one that would never know what it was to be weak. Again the thought fluttered, and I saw the boy from my dreams, his whine like the furious beat of the blue bottle's wings. I pictured myself reaching into my head and snatching the image, crushing it beneath my heel until nothing remained but a gritty smear. There was no other world, only this one, only my one, and here I would be king. I laughed, but the sounds were pistol shots fired out from the anger in my guts. I squirmed against my restraints, desperate to be free so that I could unleash the fury I felt on the first thing I saw. Opening my mouth, I shouted for the wheezers to finish what they had started, but all that came out was the deep, throbbing growl of an injured lion. It didn't matter. I had no use for words, only violence. What good was speech when you were getting pounded by broken fists? What use was language when you faced the monsters of the world? I growled again, this time using every last drop of air in my lungs. It rose in pitch like a jet engine, so loud I heard the scalpels on the tray beside me tremble against one another. It felt good, and I unleashed another, a devil's roar that blasted from the room and chased its own echoes down the corridor. I opened my mouth for a third, but my lungs were starved of air, and all I could produce was a weak groan and a string of spit that trickled from my mouth. "It feels good, doesn't it?" said a voice from the door. The warden was standing there, half in and half out of the room. He wore that same empty smile, like the painted face of a punch doll, but I could sense the pride emanating from him. I still had no words, but he didn't wait for a reply. "To feel the power growing from your pain, to feel your body become something nature never could have made." He ducked out, and I heard him bark an order. By the time he looked back at me, I could make out the slap of booted feet on rock behind him. "I can sense that hunger for strength in you more than most. I can smell it. The world will pay for what it has done to you. Together we will make it suffer." He must have noticed the gleam in my eye as my imagination gave life to his thoughts. The warden nodded at me, then stood to one side as a pair of black suits marched in, one wheeling a gurney. They gently unfastened the buckles that held me, lifting my body onto the wheeled stretcher. As they did so, I caught a glimpse of my legs, like two tree trunks wrapped in crimson gauze. The pain still radiated from them, but I relished it because it meant they were a part of me. "They've done a good job," the warden went on, gently smoothing down the bandages. "These will heal up in no time." My arms," I tried to say, coughing up another smart snarl. "Patience," the warden said, obviously delighted. "The rest will come in time. Too much too soon and you won't be able to cope. Your body is young enough to handle the nectar, the surgery, but your genes are only so flexible. And you don't want to find out what happens when they're pushed to the point of meltdown." The black suits began to wheel me out of the room, and as I passed the warden, he rested a cool, dry palm on my forehead. "Rest and dream of darkness," he said. "It won't be long." He lifted his hand, but I could still feel the cold weight of his fingers as I was pushed out of the door and down the corridor. I heard the infirmary long before we reached it. Something was screaming inside, not in pain, but in anger. The sound was loud enough to make my ears ring as the suits pushed my gurney through the plastic slats. I tilted my head to get a better look, saw the curtains of one of the cubicles billow as vague shapes wrestled inside. There was another scream, then the dull thump of a fist on flesh. "Number 195 again," growled one of the black suits by my side, running over to the cubicle and disappearing inside. The other guard wheeled me across the stone floor, muttering something under his breath. It was as he was preparing to lift me from the gurney that chaos erupted. Another scream blasted from behind the curtain, this one followed by a black suit crashing back through it. He tripped over his feet and spun through the air, a delicate double helix of dark blood spiralling from his nose. He hit the floor hard, racked with spasms that made him resemble an overturned beetle fighting to right itself. Swearing, my black suit porter dropped me back onto the gurney and raced across the room so fast that he was just a charcoal smudge against the row of white curtains. He didn't even have a chance to enter the cubicle before an arm of solid muscle punched its way out, catching him on the jaw and snapping his head around with a crack that could have been the earth splitting. He dropped like a sack of bricks, the light fading fast from his silver eyes. I sat up, the anger in me extinguished by fear. From behind the curtain came another scream, but this time its pitch was lower. I heard something tear, like the wing being pulled from a cooked chicken, and a splash of red bloomed on the white material. Behind the trails of colour that dripped slowly towards the floor, I could see the silhouette of a hulking shape stagger forward. It reached out and pulled the curtain to one side, revealing something surely too large, too misshapen to be a face. Eyes like polished coins blinked into focus, dropping to the black suits on the floor and then slowly grinding up towards me. And with that look, something came flooding back. I knew it. I recognised that cold, soulless touch of that gaze. In my head I saw a boy who had once terrified me far more than any Weezer, a kid who had taken lives with the casual ease of a wrestler snapping matchsticks. Gary Owens. There were shouts from outside the infirmary, the thunder of boots on stone, but I couldn't take my eyes off the creature in front of me. It pushed its way through the curtain and I saw a body of knotted flesh, muscles sprouting from muscles like a gnarled oak tree, all barely held together by a coat of stitched skin. Even as I watched, something seemed to swell beneath its flesh, its arms bulging outwards as though they were being pressure-fed with water. A cavern of darkness opened up in the centre of its face, freeing another hellish scream. Even as it ended, the creature was bounding towards me, the very rock shaking with the sheer strength of it. Panic took over, propelling me from the gurney before I could even think about what I was doing. I hit the ground, prepared to run, but as soon as I landed, the pain clawed up my new legs and into my spine. I sprawled across the cold stone, barely even finding the strength to look over my shoulder to face my death. The creature swiped out at the gurney with a giant hand, sending it flying across the room. Then it was on me, fingers like hot iron around my chest. It picked me up as though I weighed nothing, drawing me close to the pit of its mouth. It was as if the fear purged the nectar from my body, pure adrenaline stripping the poison from my arteries. As I hung from the creature's fists, the heavy curtain across my mind was pulled back, and I remembered who I was and where I'd come from, and with that knowledge came language. "Gary!" I wheezed, the word nothing but breath. I sucked in more air, tried again. "Gary, remember your name!" The creature paused, its platinum eyes swimming in and out of focus like a blind man learning to see. Its breath came in short, ragged bursts, each one carrying the stench of decay from inside it. "Gary!" I repeated. "Gary Owens, it's your name!" The hammered footsteps reached a crescendo as the black suits poured into the room. The creature looked up and screamed again, blasting me with so much rancid breath that I gagged. I felt its fingers tighten, felt my ribs bend under the pressure. Black spots began to appear in the corners of my vision, like a match held beneath a photograph. The first shot caused the creature to spin back. Its arm jerked and I found myself airborne, crashing down onto my shoulder before rolling into a curtain. I looked up, trying to make sense of the cartwheeling room, saw the creature take another shotgun round to its chest. The flesh erupted, but it might as well have been stung by a bee. With a roar of defiance, it charged towards the guards. This time, they were prepared. The nearest suit fired his weapon again, taking out the creature's legs. Another two ran forward with a pole topped with a noose that danced and sparked with electricity. Before the freak could get back up, the wire was looped around its neck, its skin rippling as the charge pulsed into its body. After a couple of attempts to rise, the creature let itself drop limply to the floor, its arms twisting twitching uselessly. 2 of the black suits ran to check on their fallen comrades, the shaking of heads as they pressed fingers to necks, making it obvious that they wouldn't ever be getting up. It was only then that they seemed to notice me, the nearest of the guards, striding over. "Leave him!" The words came from the far side of the room, spat out like wormwood. I looked around to see the warden approach, all trace of a smile now scrubbed from his leather face. He loomed over me, and I could feel his eyes bathing me like an icy shower. I cowered before him, shrinking as far into myself as I could while the goose flesh covered my skin. "What a disappointment!" he grunted before turning his attention to Gary, or the thing that had once been Gary. "Patch up number 195. Take him to general population tonight. Let him sate his bloodlust on his old cellmate. And when he comes back down, make sure he is secure." He crouched, grabbing my chin with smooth fingers. "I thought you'd left your old life behind," he hissed, his eyes black holes that led into the abyss of his soul. "If you remember his name, then I take it you remember yours. Well, I guess we'll have to try a bit harder to destroy that pathetic little mind." He used his other hand to ram his finger repeatedly against my temple before dropping me to the floor and standing. "Take this maggot back to the screening room, lock him there for 2 days, and double his feed." The warden stormed from the room, only looking back once as he reached the main door of the infirmary, screaming at the black suits, "And get this mess cleaned up!" Hey, they were 2 long chapters, weren't they? Okay, the next chapter is called Arms. So, presumably, Alex's transformation will continue. I'm really enjoying this. Like I said, this was always my favourite book of the series. I think, I don't know. It's always hard to tell because it just feels like one big story that was cut up into 5 bits. But I do really, really like this one. So, I hope you're enjoying it. And yeah, I hope you will join me again tomorrow for another taste of what life is like in the 5-star luxury resort that is Furness Penitentiary. Have fun, whatever you're doing, and see you soon. Bye! Sorry, that was a bit of a crazy bye. Bye.